Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
What a great speech as well.
Thank you.
The right call to action. Don't be afraid of change.
We need it.
Yes.
It's actually interesting. It's one of the things that Canada is doing right now is being a little self-satisfied on some fronts, which is easy to do when we look at the States, frankly.
I'm British. I'm just going to pull out the fact I grew up in the UK, and yes, I'm American too, but sometimes I want to drift one way versus another.
Let's get to your business.
Yeah.
It is growing in a phenomenal pace.
Thank you.
What's the big opportunity that you see?
Sure. Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, it's a wild ride. So by the way, yes, we're growing at a phenomenal pace right now. We just grew 60% year over year last quarter, and that's accelerated for the last 5 quarters. But as you noted, it's not always just straight up and to the right. So entrepreneurship it's hard work at the end of the day. You need to stay very open to all the trends that are happening in your business. You need to really embrace change, and I think it's something, you mentioned Jack, I think it's a thing that Jack is great at exhorting us to just never be satisfied. And in fact, he loves to inject change on all fronts into the business all the time. So what's driving our business, first is there's a shift to the cashless society, and you see that in Canada. People prefer to pay card first. I saw a stat about the average Canadian has $46.50 in their pocket, which I was like, that must be an overstatement. Do you all have $46.50 in your pockets right now? I never have any money. The second thing is really serving the underserved. So we absolutely see a trend where financial institutions, broadly speaking, and it's a global phenomenon, have just not served everyone. And that's limiting business growth. It's limiting what consumers can do. And then the third big shift we see is the shift to omnichannel. So you mentioned Walmart, but I do get to see this interesting dichotomy of the largest retailer in the world, $500 billion of sales last year, versus literally folks doing a side hustle, right? It's not even their full-time job, but they're using Square to get up and going and to sell maybe beautiful art or jewelry that they make in their free time. But whether they're Walmart or that little side hustle, they're facing the fact that their buyer is showing up in all sorts of forms now. So maybe walking into their store, maybe walking up and using their online app, maybe it's their online website, might be a marketplace, like Caviar is our food delivery marketplace in the US, but marketplaces like Eventbrite or Etsy. It could be voice-activated commerce, right? I can walk into my kitchen now and technically tell the little thing sitting right in the middle of the island that I need more oil to cook with. And so all of these changes are really rampant regardless of your size of business or your type of business.
So one of the things that I found really interesting that you told me earlier, which I had not known, was just the sheer number of businesses that operate with cash only.
Yeah.
Which is, give the stats, it's like half of your UK?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple ways to look at it. So one, 60% of all the sellers who have come on Square in Canada didn't accept cards before. They were cash-only businesses. If you look at the UK market, it's a great example because these trends are true globally. 50% of small businesses don't accept cards today. They are literally cash and check only, mostly cash. Only the US really has checks. And part of it is, first of all, small businesses tend to think of cash as free. And so there's a lot of education that has to happen. One is you're losing sales because all of you are walking in with your $46.50, but maybe they've got a $100 item to sell, so you can't make the purchase. And I just had that happen to me at the weekend in the farmer's market. I wanted to buy a salad bowl, and the lady was very determined I would pay in cash, and I was equally determined that I wouldn't.
She didn't know what she was dealing with.
Boom. But her reasons, and we talked it through, one was, cash is free, which it's not. For a start, cash has a tendency to shrink, right? It moves in and out of people's pockets, sometimes the way that you don't want it to do. Because you think of it as valuable, it's usually the owner that does the thing like counting the cash at night. Like, think how crazy that is. It is such a kind of a low additive skill to your business, yet you're the only person you trust to count it. So just think about the hours when you could be thinking about the next amazing new product for your business, but instead you're literally counting and then taking it to a bank, so you got to drive there. So there's actually a lot of time involved in cash. And then cash is completely anonymous. So if you ever want to, this is my back and forth with the lovely woman in the farmer's market, because she said, well, I want to feel like it's a personal transaction. And I said, okay, but if I pay you with a card on a thing like Square, you will actually know something about me. I'll give you my email address or my phone number. We keep it anonymous. It sits within Square systems. But then if you want to email all your customers who bought in the last 6 months because it's the holidays, and now you want to see if they want to come back and maybe buy a gift, you can actually now come back and talk to me again. Mm-hmm. And if I pay in cash, that cannot happen. So it is a phenomenal thing that even today, globally, 60% of all consumer gross receipts are done in cash or check.
Did she admit that she was just dodging taxes?
She was lovely. She was not dodging taxes.
No?
Come on.
There's an element of that, though. I mean, as you grow, as you convert those businesses to card transactions, the gray market does diminish.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I think with small businesses. So people always make that point about, there's some under the table stuff going on. And then there's kind of a feeling that small businesses are risky. And I think actually both things are a little unfair to small businesses because they're usually, I find, the salt of the earth, right? These are the people you want to trust with like your kids because they're just great people. They just want to make a living. And so, thank you.
She sells salad bowls.
And so literally, the big financials have kind of said, no, sorry, we don't want you in our system because, I don't know, you look risky or your FICO score or whatever score doesn't look good. And so when Square came about, we said, we're not going to think about risk that way. We're going to look at the signals of the transactions themselves. And with that, we'll know a lot better if you are a business that should be up and on the system to keep the whole system safe. In fact, like a funny story, Square came about because Jack, our co-founder actually, and Jim, our other co-founder, had an actual problem. Jim wanted to sell a beautiful piece of glass art, and he missed the sale because the buyer only had a card. And so when they decided to get going with Square, they couldn't get on the system because as entrepreneurs, they'd maxed out all their credit cards and their credit scores were terrible. And so effectively the system said, no, thank you. And so I think that's what we're trying to change. And we use a lot of AI, machine learning, to do just that. 99.96, I think it is now, % of all Square transactions never touch a human being. The machine, the algorithm scores it, and they just flow. And they get stopped if they're known to be fraud. And I think that's a really important part of how you build a big, scalable company, is embracing new technologies like ML and AI to really start to automate more and more of what your system is doing. So then the real higher value tasks can ultimately fall into people who then can be creative and innovative and then hopefully create signal to put it all back into a model.
You are one of those companies that facilitates a service, but you're really trafficking in data. Mm-hmm. And you're gathering a lot of data, to your point, that you can help people, retailers and your other customers use to their advantage. When we think about ML, AI, where does that go? Are there other uses for the data that some of the people in this room might be able to pitch you software for?
Yeah, so, first, when we built the product at Square, we talk about having 4 elements of remarkability. So our goal is always, people will use terms in startups like minimum viable product, and we don't want to build a minimum viable product. We want to build a minimum remarkable product. And we have 4 corners, because we're a Square. I used to think in 3s, but now I'm all about 4s. So self-serve, so we wanted people to get onboarded in minutes. That involves a lot of data to understand the risk. We want it to be fast. We think fast is wowing. So if you're a small business and you can get access to your revenues next day, which is what we do here in Canada, or what we'd like to bring to Canada, and we have in the US right now, is instant, that is wowing. Because again, most small businesses don't go out of business because they don't have enough cash. It's because they don't have enough cash flow. And so we fix that problem. So self-serve, fast. The third element of remarkability is elegant. So, we spent forever talking about simple, want to make it really easy. But actually what we realized is a lot of our software now is quite sophisticated. Like if you look at our Square for Restaurants or Square for Retail point of sales, those are very, very specifically built for those exact implementations. And there's a lot of sophistication on the back end, or what we think of as elegance. But then the fourth piece is cohesive, which brings you to your data point, that when you're able to then see all that data across the Square ecosystem, you can do really interesting things for your sellers. Like, for example, we can see that when that lovely lady in the farmer's market, because I'm going to win her over, sends that email out to all of her buyers who purchased in the last 6 months, we can actually tell her what the response rate was, like how many people came back and actually did a second purchase. We can give you smart ideas for marketing. So, for me, one of the things that always makes me die in life is the punch card coffee, right? Buy 10 coffees, get the 11th free. Let me tell you, that person is buying the 11th copy, and the 12th, and the 13th. So all you're doing is cutting into your margins. What you should be offering them is a free donut or 10% off lunch, because you want to bring them back to bring you more sales, not just the same sale that you're making. And so with the data, we can actually help the seller make a smart business decision. And so I think that's where data, when it's used correctly and with utility for your customers, that's when I think you can do some really interesting things.
One of the things that I know you care about, and that I think a lot of people are passionate about as well, is inclusivity in the financial system. We talk a lot about access and the importance of it. The unbanked, that there remain so many unbanked across North America is shocking and disastrous. Yeah. And many of them fall into very bad hands and cycles. How do you help them? What's the transition from them? Because they got to leapfrog over some stuff to get your help.
It's true. It is definitely one of my personal passions, but it's certainly a massive passion at Square, right? On the wall, it actually says economic empowerment. And so, it started with those businesses, so those folks who never got on the system, probably because the system said, thanks, but no thanks. So helping them never miss that sale. And now with individuals, so we have a product in the US called Cash App. It's actually in the US and in the UK. And that has become a product, it started as P2P, but then we started to give people the ability to keep a balance in their Cash App account. And with that balance, they now get a card. So that card can be used anywhere Visa is accepted. You can go to an ATM and actually pull out cash if you really need to. We also give them the ability to, for example, put their payroll into that account. And so it's starting to give them more utility and feeling more and more like what a bank of the future could look like. And why that's important is because, as you pointed out, like banks have kind of left behind either folks who are underbanked because bank accounts are too expensive. Like, we all take for granted that we can have a debit account, but for a lot of people, keeping a minimum balance, or God forbid you go $1 overdrawn and now you pay a $25 fee and it can compound, right? That is a very expensive outcome, frankly, if you can't afford $100, $200, $300 a month. And then on the other side, I think the other place that the financial services are leaving folks behind is, I'm starting to call them more digital natives, because millennials, even millennials, are getting old. Turns out there's a new generation coming up under them. And so people just want to think about their finances differently, right? They're used to using their smartphone. I don't know what device it will be in 10 years, but they're used to being able to do everything that their life involves in a given day or week or month in a hyper-fast electronic way. And I think that's, what I like seeing in the Cash App is just how neat the team has built. And by the way, most of that team is in Kitchener. So it's actually an amazing Canadian innovation story, just what they have built. Yeah, go Kitchener. And actually I'll drop the other, in Toronto, actually most of our hardware, or like the deep workings of the ASIC, of the chip, now I'm going to put my engineering hat back on, most of that is actually designed and built out here in Toronto. So we love Canadian entrepreneurs and innovators.
Those are, I assume, Americans clapping out there, because with all respect to you, and I'm sure that the folks in Kitchener are happy to sell you stuff, we should be building our own world-class companies using that technology, folks.
Well, we'll do both.
We
How about
export
that?
our IP, and it's not always a good thing, but I'm glad you're not getting it from Germany.
We're doing both. Yeah.
Okay. You're a bank, though. You just Cash App with you're a deposit-taking institution?
It's becoming more and more bank-like.
And what's the upside of that? Other than, I hear somebody like you talk about this, and I think I must go sell my bank stocks. The banks are in trouble because you're moving into this territory. But they make their money by taking deposits and lending it out at a good differential. What's the future margin growth of that business for you?
Yeah, so I think if you look across all of Square's ecosystem, ultimately there's really great interplays across the ecosystem. And what I mean by that is if you look at something like we have a payroll product. So classic small business, larger business need. And in fact, I work with our payroll team reports to me. I always feel weird saying that because actually I work for them. We should be completely clear. They're amazing and doing it all. But it's a good example where today if you get paid out in payroll and don't have an account to push that payroll out to, so you were actually, one of the main feature requests when we first launched was paper check cutting, which I was like, oh my God, who? And then I uncovered this whole how many hourly workers don't have a bank account to put it into. We can put them through an onboarding flow that drops them into Cash App. And so now you have this wonderful interplay happening for a business that's on Square, a restaurant, that is managing their point of sale, that is using time cards already on the system to manage employees. And those employees are getting paid through payroll, and they're dropping into Cash App, where they're now getting access to their wages immediately and can pull it out of an ATM or buy online, whatever they want to do. And by the way, they do it and use it mainstream. Walmart is our #1 place that people go spend with the Cash App card, for example. So that's really the future for us, is just more how do we create more inclusion? And does it have to be at the expense of someone? I think the fact that where we started this conversation, the fact that there's so much greenfield opportunity, that's what makes it so interesting to me, because you're actually solving a true customer struggle that no one else today is solving for them.
How do you keep that level of internal innovation, problem solving? Who's in charge of that, and how do you kind of foster it so that it's constant?
Yeah, so no one is in charge of it. So pet peeve in life is like heads of innovation or innovation teams, or heads of strategy, same thing, because effectively what you're saying to everyone else who's not in that team is, don't worry about innovation, don't worry about strategy, they got it covered, right? And it has to actually be in the water, right? Every single person should walk to work every day thinking about, how do I disrupt myself? Like, what are we doing that maybe we should completely disrupt? Because otherwise someone else is going to do it to you. And then on the innovation front, right, to do that, we start with, I already gave you our the 4 elements of remarkability, but the starting point is to build a remarkable product, you have to understand a customer's struggle. And so we spend a huge amount of time looking at, talking to our customers, bringing insights into Square. We ask our engineers, for example, to go stand behind a point of sale system on a busy lunch and actually feel what it's like. Our coffee shop that's in our space, the place that people go to get their lunch, those are actually real Square sellers that live out in the wild as well as in our building. And again, I think it's a great way to just constantly remind all of Square that, hey, we need to keep disrupting, and it's on everyone. So a phrase I particularly like is this idea of great ideas come from everywhere. And so I don't want, for example, my core finance team, I'm like, you're just as much in charge of thinking of great product ideas as the engineer that's building, the next feature. And how do I make sure that gets pushed in as we plan, for example, is a huge part of my role.
What made you want to be an engineer?
Oh, I was just super curious. I took my mom's Hoover. I can say that in Canada, right? Because you actually know what a Hoover is.
Hoover, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to a vacuum cleaner. I took that thing to bits so many times, and there would always be 1 or 2 screws left, and you name it. Whatever was broken around the house, I was Miss Fix-It from I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I, for better or worse, loved to take things to pieces, absolutely was super curious about the world. I grew up in an environment where it was expected that if I was good in school and liked kind of math and science, that I would become a doctor or maybe an accountant. Those were the 2 roles. Not I love both those roles, just to be clear, but it wasn't really for me. And so I think what I loved about engineering was that ability to, that was okay to go take things to bits. It was expected of you, and to be curious. And also, frankly, I just loved the challenge of it. Like, when I looked at it and saw that, there were like 3 women in my engineering department, like, that drove me. I was like, hell yeah, we're going to figure out how next year it's 5, and then next year it's 40. So there's almost a little bit of me as well that likes to rail back against being told I can't do something. I'm a little bit in the mode of like, well, let me show you.
Now, success will be the day that we sit up here and I don't ask you this question. But you are still a woman, a powerful woman in Silicon Valley at a time when that is still slightly, spotted unicorn. But also in the middle of Me Too. Or I don't know, are we in the middle? We're in Me Too. How is it changing? How is the kind of atmosphere changing? And the reason that I think this is an important question is because that's a place where ideas, imagination, innovation, creativity are so important.
Yep.
And so, you don't want people to draw inside the lines necessarily. Yep. Is it changing in a way that is better?
I think it's changing, but not fast enough. I actually will not give the platitude of like, oh, don't worry, it's getting better, because I still don't think we've fixed, if it's gender, but I think every minority group, right? Clearly, it's still very homogenous, and that's not true just of tech or fintech. That's true of just, if you look around any industry segment. What we've focused on at Square, and you mentioned it in your intro, is inclusion. So a lot of companies talk about diversity and inclusion, and we say inclusion and diversity, because if you just go out and try to hire amazing people that are diverse, however you define that, but you bring them into an environment that's not welcoming, they're just going to leave almost immediately. So it's a huge waste of everyone's energies. And so we've taken a tone at the top around, you can't be what you can't see. So certainly from a gender perspective, I'm really proud of how Square looks today. I think about 60, maybe it's a little bit more, 60% of all Squares report up ultimately to a woman at the executive level. And in really technical roles. So our lead engineer or head of all of our seller products, for example, is an amazing female engineer or scientist. Our head of legal, for example, and I could go end. So it's been impressive to create just that, you can see it, so people can look up and aspire. And then I think at the incoming class level, we've also spent a lot of time there trying to really open up ourselves to more inclusiveness. And again, it's good business sense. Frankly, if you don't look like your customers, how can you possibly understand their struggle? And so we believe that if you seek divergent opinions, and those should just be sitting around the table in every decision that you're making or any plan that you're doing, that you'll just build a better company. It's good for business when you have more diversity. And so it's a little bit of a head scratcher to me when I look at other companies and think, wow, like every bit of research out in the world will tell you your company will be more successful if your board is more diverse or your executive team is more diverse. And yet, you're over here doing all these other things. Why not do this one thing that everyone has kind of proven to you with numbers makes a difference? And so I think we just need to keep, pushing it more and more. I think Canada's actually done a great job with some of the frameworks you've put in place around women on boards, for example. So, keep pushing it from all angles, and hopefully change will happen.
We don't have a ton of time, but that deserves some applause. If you could give one piece of advice to the entrepreneurs in the room, what would it be? What would you leave them with?
Sure. So my number one piece of advice to anyone that talks to me is always get an adrenaline rush every day. And so what I mean by that might sound a little like living life a little too crazy, but frankly, if you're not getting an adrenaline rush, then you're comfortable, right? It's actually perfectly aligned with your book and what you talked about. So I actually try to seek out opportunities where I feel uncomfortable or I feel a little out over my skis or I haven't done something before, because that tells me that I'm actually pushing myself. And then similarly, when I look at my team and I look at the folks around me, I can tell when they're a little comfy. And I'm like, oh no, we're not going to let that happen. Let me give you some new, right? The gift of working with me certainly is the gift of good work is more good work. But I think a lot of that is really trying to make sure people feel pushed, because then when they achieve, the feeling of achievement is huge. And that's what gets them going to get back up in the morning and come back and run and fight hard the next day. So get an adrenaline rush. And if you're sitting in a career or in a job right now where you're like, you know what, I just didn't feel in any way kind of afraid in the past week or month, God, if it's the last year, go do something else. The time is ripe and you're way too valuable to be sitting around. Life's too short to just be sitting around waiting for, I don't know, to happen.
Do you allow failure in your team?
You have to embrace it. If people are afraid to fail, they're never going to get that adrenaline rush, right? The two things are really correlated. Now, I think there's a spectrum, right? If they're failing at the same thing, that's kind of a process step that we shouldn't fail at, because it's important that
sometimes
we're
failure is just failure.
It is. Sometimes it is. Clearly you need to go fix that and make sure it's not happening. But I think failure with big, audacious ideas should absolutely be celebrated. And, it's something, given I'm an implant to Silicon Valley, so I am that immigrant, I see it in spades in Silicon Valley, how well it's done. And it's a little bit the triteness of embracing failure, but it works, because look at the innovation that's coming from there. And I find when I go home, to the UK, but particularly to Northern Ireland, a smaller community, there's not that same embracing of failure. If anything, there's actually sometimes a flip of wanting to bring down success, which always floors me. And so, I think that's something that if you want to build this amazingly innovative, next generation society and, just business community, I think you have to get out there over your skis, get the adrenaline rush, and don't worry about the failure. You'll just learn a ton.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Sarah.
Thank you. It was great.
Sarah Friar, ladies and
gentlemen.
Thanks so much.